Henry was a quiet man in his late 50s who lived alone at the edge of a small town. He had worked as a carpenter for many years, fixing other people's homes and barns. But after his small workshop closed due to unpaid bills, his life slowly fell apart. He had no wife, no children, and few friends left. Most days, he just drove his old pickup truck through the countryside to clear his mind and remember better times. One cool autumn morning, Henry was driving down a dusty back road when he noticed a small wooden sign leaning against a tree. It said, "Old barn for sale, 50 cents. At first, he laughed and kept driving. 50 cents was nothing. You could not even buy a cup of coffee for that. But after a few minutes, something about the sign stuck in his mind. He turned his truck around and drove back. The old barn stood a few yards off the road. It looked terrible. The roof was half gone. The doors were hanging loose, and wild vines had grown all around it. It looked like it had not been touched in 50 years. The land around it was silent except for the sound of the wind and a few birds. An old farmer stood nearby, watching Henry get out of his truck. "You thinking of buying that old thing?" The farmer asked with a chuckle. 50 cents and it's yours. I just want it off my land. It's falling apart anyway." Henry looked at the barn again. Most people would have walked away, but something about it caught his heart. Maybe it was the smell of old wood or the way the light came through the broken roof. It reminded him of his father's barn from long ago, the one he used to help repair as a boy. He felt a strange pull, like the place was calling him. "I'll take it," Henry said softly. The old farmer blinked. "You serious?" Henry nodded and reached into his pocket. He handed the man 2 quarters. The farmer laughed and shook his head. "You must be crazy," he said. "But it's yours now." "Good luck," Henry smiled. "Thanks. I'll need it." He spent the rest of the morning walking around the barn. The boards were cracked and the floor creaked under his boots. Cobwebs hung everywhere and dust filled the air like fog. But Henry didn't see a ruin. He saw a challenge. He saw something worth saving. He started cleaning right away. He brought out his old broom and tools from the truck and began to sweep the floor. Every board groaned as he moved. He found broken tools, rusty nails, and old bottles covered in dirt. There were even a few mice that ran away when he lifted a piece of wood. The air inside smelled like time itself, old hay, wood, and history. Henry worked until sunset, humming softly to himself. As he lifted one of the loose floorboards near the center of the barn, he heard a hollow sound underneath. It didn't sound normal. He tapped again, and the echo came back faint but clear. His curiosity grew. He got down on his knees and brushed the dust away. The board looked slightly newer than the others, as if someone had replaced it years later. Carefully, he used a crowbar to lift it. Beneath the floor, he saw a small wooden box covered in layers of dirt and cobwebs. His heart began to beat faster. "What's this?" he whispered to himself. He gently pulled the box out. It was about the size of a shoebox and tied shut with an old piece of rope. The lock was broken, so he opened it slowly. Inside was a bundle of yellowed papers wrapped in cloth. He lifted them out and unfolded the first one. His eyes widened, thought it was a hand-drawn map. The ink was faded but still visible. The lines showed rivers, valleys, and mountains. There were small notes written in neat handwriting, and in the corner, a date, 1863. He turned to another paper. It was another map, this one showing what looked like an old trade route with tiny marks and symbols. One page had a faint signature at the bottom, G.A. Custer. Henry froze. "General Custer?" he whispered. He knew that name from history books. Could it be real? He wasn't sure what to think. The papers looked ancient. His hand shook as he carefully placed them back in the box. The sun was setting now, and a golden light came through the broken roof. Henry sat there for a long time, staring at the box. He felt something deep inside him, a mix of wonder and disbelief. He didn't think of money. He thought of the hands that had once drawn those maps, the stories hidden in those lines. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind against the barn walls seemed to whisper secrets. He stayed up, reading through the maps again and again. The ink marks felt alive. He wanted to know their story. The next morning, he decided to drive into town. He placed the box on the seat beside him, wrapped in a blanket. He went to the small town museum, where a kind woman named Laura worked as the curator. Laura listened carefully as Henry told her how he had bought the barn for 50 cents and found the maps. She smiled at first, thinking it was just another old box of papers. But when she opened it and looked closer, her expression changed. "Where did you say you found these?" she asked quietly. "In an old barn, just outside town." She held one of the maps up to the light and whispered, "This handwriting, this style, these could be original Civil War maps, maybe even military drafts." Henry blinked. "You mean they're real?" "They could be priceless," she said. "I'll have to call a historian to verify, but if these are genuine, you found something extraordinary." Henry felt dizzy. He sat down slowly, still not believing it. He had paid 50 cents for the barn. He never expected to find anything more than dust and old boards. Within a few hours, 2 historians arrived from the university. They examined each paper carefully with gloves and special magnifiers. They compared ink marks and signatures. When they finished, one of them turned to Henry and said, "Sir, these are authentic. These are original maps used during the Civil War." Henry could hardly speak. He stared at the box, then at the barn in his memory. The old broken building had been hiding something so valuable all these years, waiting quietly for someone to find it. Word spread through the small town quickly. By evening, everyone knew about the man who bought a barn for 50 cents and found treasure. Reporters showed up. Neighbors stopped by to ask questions. Some people offered him money right away, hoping to buy the land or the maps. Henry only smiled and said, "I paid 50 cents. I won't sell for a penny more." People laughed, thinking he was joking, but he meant every word. He didn't want to sell. The maps were not just pieces of paper to him. They were a gift from the past, a reminder that even the most broken things could still hold something special. That night, as the moonlight touched the barn's roof, Henry stood outside and looked up at the stars. The same stars that once guided the soldiers who drew those maps. He thought about his father and the old barn they once repaired together. "Maybe this was meant for me," he said softly. The wind whispered through the trees, almost like an answer. The old barn stood quiet but strong, just as it had for more than 100 years. And deep inside, beneath the wood and dust, Henry knew there was still more to discover. The real treasure wasn't just in the maps. It was in the story the barn was waiting to tell. He had no idea that what he had found so far was only half of it. Something else was still hidden behind those walls, something that would change everything again. A week passed since Henry found the old maps inside the barn. The small town was still buzzing with excitement. Reporters had come and gone, and curious people still drove by to take pictures of the old building that had become famous overnight. But Henry didn't care about the attention. He just wanted to fix the barn, the same way he had planned before finding the box. For him, the real treasure was the peace he felt while working with his hands again. One early morning, before sunrise, he drove back to the barn. The air was cold and still. Fog covered the field, and dew shined on the grass like silver. He parked his truck and stood quietly, looking at the barn. It was old, but somehow it felt alive now. He felt like it was watching him, waiting for him to come back. He carried his toolbox inside, and started repairing the broken boards on the sidewall. As he hammered a nail, a small gust of wind blew through a crack behind the haystack. He turned his head when he heard a faint rattle. Something behind the wall didn't sound right. It was a hollow sound, not like solid wood. He stopped working and slowly brushed away the hay. The boards there looked different, too. They weren't as old as the rest of the wall. Henry tapped on them again, hollow. His heart started to beat faster. "What are you hiding now?" he whispered with a small smile. He grabbed his crowbar and carefully pried one of the boards loose. Dust filled the air, and behind it, he found a hidden space between the walls, small but deep enough to hide something. He reached inside, and his hand touched cold metal. He pulled it out slowly. It was a small iron chest, covered in rust. The lock was old and weak. Henry used his wrench to twist it open. It broke easily. Inside, he found several small cloth bags and one folded piece of parchment. He opened the bags and gasped. They were filled with old coins, heavy, round, and golden. Some were silver. Each coin was marked with strange designs and dates from the 1800s. His hands trembled as he picked one up. "These are from the Civil War period," he whispered. He unfolded the parchment. It was a letter, written in faded ink, signed by someone named Samuel Carter, a Union soldier. The letter told a story how he and his unit had hidden maps and gold coins inside several barns along the valley during the last days of the war. They were trying to keep them safe from being stolen. The letter ended with a few simple lines that made Henry stop breathing for a moment. "If you ever find this, protect it. Do not sell it. These treasures belong to history, not to any man's pocket. Keep them safe for the land they came from." Henry sat down on the floor, holding the letter. His eyes filled with tears. He felt as if the soldier was speaking directly to him, across time. He had found the treasure, but it wasn't meant to be sold or owned. It was meant to be cared for. He looked at the chest full of coins and thought about all the people who would want to buy it, the collectors, the museums, the investors. They would all offer him huge amounts of money. But deep inside, he already knew his answer. He carefully placed everything back into the chest, closed it, and sat quietly for a long time. The barn was silent, and sunlight started to stream through the cracks in the roof. Dust floated in the air like golden snow. He smiled softly and whispered, "Don't worry, Samuel. I'll protect it." That same day, Henry drove to town again. He met Laura, the museum curator, and showed her what he had found. She gasped when she saw the coins and read the letter. Her hand shook as she said, "Henry, do you realize what this means? This isn't just treasure. This is a piece of forgotten history." Historians confirmed it within days. The coins were real, and the letter was written by a soldier who had fought in the Civil War and disappeared afterward. The story quickly reached newspapers across the state. People called it the 50-cent barn miracle. Reporters came again, offering him interviews and money. Some companies wanted to buy the coins for millions. Even the governor sent a letter thanking him for preserving a part of national history. But Henry turned every offer down. He only smiled and repeated the same words. "I bought that barn for 50 cents, and I'm not selling it for a penny more." When people asked him why, he said, "Because it's not mine to sell. It belongs to everyone who believes in something greater than money." The museum worked with Henry to restore the barn without changing its spirit. They made it a public place where people could come and see the story for free. Children from nearby schools started visiting on field trips. Henry often sat outside, smiling as he watched them run around, pointing at the maps and coins displayed behind glass. One afternoon, a small boy came up to him and asked, "Mister, why didn't you sell it? You could have been rich." Henry looked at the boy, smiled gently, and said, "Because some things are richer than money, son." like stories, memories, and the feeling you get when you do the right thing. The boy nodded slowly, trying to understand. Henry gave him a pat on the shoulder. "Remember that," he said softly. As the years passed, the barn became known all over the country. Travelers came to see it, not because it was fancy, but because it was a symbol of faith, patience, and honesty. People called Henry Mr. 50 Cents, and though he always laughed at the name, he secretly liked it. He spent most of his days sitting on a small chair outside the barn, carving little wooden birds and giving them to visitors. "Take this," he'd say. "It's not gold, but it's made with heart." One spring evening, Henry sat watching the sunset over the fields. The barn glowed in the golden light. It was strong now, fixed and full of life again. He thought about the old farmer who sold it to him, about Laura, about the letter, and about the soldier who had once hidden those treasures. He whispered softly, "You were right, Samuel. Some treasures are meant to be kept, not sold." Years went by, and Henry grew older. He never left the town. When he passed away quietly in his sleep, the townspeople gathered at the barn for a small ceremony. Laura stood in front of the crowd with tears in her eyes. She placed a simple wooden frame inside the barn. In it was Henry's original 50-cent coin, the same one he had used to buy the barn. Below the coin, a small plaque read, "He bought it for 50 cents, but gave the world something priceless." Visitors still come to that barn today. They touch the wooden beams, read the story, and feel inspired by the simple man who turned 50 cents into a treasure greater than gold. Children laugh, families take pictures, and some people leave small notes by the plaque messages of gratitude and hope. Every year, on the anniversary of his discovery, the town holds a small event called the 50-Cent Festival. They tell Henry's story to remind everyone that true worth is not in money but in kindness, honesty, and heart. And as the evening sun sets behind the barn, its golden rays still shine through the same cracks where Henry once stood, holding that little wooden box. The air feels calm, and the old boards seem to whisper his words again. "I'll never sell for a penny more." Because what he really found that day wasn't just old maps or coins. He found purpose. He found peace. And that, more than anything else, was the most priceless treasure of all.